Someone asked me, one of the waitresses helping us out, bringing coffee on, wow, where's that? I said, oh, that's just down the road, just down the block. No, the picture. Just down down in the harbor. What's the boat? The Wolfe Islander. The one behind the gentleman, the Wolfe Islander. Because very few of us remember the actual boat. Well, we're going to go way, way back in time. That's Captain Elwood Woodman, very good friend. He's still ticking. He's still around. And this was during a hard time when we were getting the boat out for I say we, I'm only about 8 years old when that picture's taken. And getting the boat out in the spring. So we're going to go way back before that picture was taken. Way back to when Kingston was just a small little harbor town. I'll sit down here so my face isn't blocking everybody. Way back when Kingstown was first formed. When the United Empire Loyalists were looking for a place to escape oppression, they went up to a place called the Kingston Ferry. And that wasn't Cape Vincent, a little place called Putnam's Ferry. And it took you over to the fort at Carleton Island, Fort Haldeman. Ferrymen like Abijah Putnam ran the little establishment, and two loyalists, Hinckley and Hitchcock, were making their way northward, loyal to the king, but a great big place was blocking the way to Kingstown, Ernestown. The places looked promising. It was called Grand Isle. And this is looking out, what they would have seen, take away some of the structures, they would have seen Carleton Island way off in the distance. And is that the promised land way back there? Well, yeah, it is kind of, but it's not. It's called Grand Isle, or, well, some of them call it Wolfe Island. This is today's Millen's Bay. Yeah, eventually it was captured, the British garrison. The earlier ferrymen, this is a list, Thomas Davis, not important, the dates. Ferry from Wolfe Island to Kingston, and ferry from Kingston to Wolfe Island. You couldn't carry passengers, you could only do it one way. Make sense? Not really. No. This was the vessel. It's a little bit smaller than the one we have now. It was called a bateau, and these were very, very common on the river. Eben Bennett ran one of the ferries, Amos Ainsley, and a man called Sam Hitchcock, pictured front and center in that faded photograph. This is the view of Kingstown, where it was originally known as Cataraqui. Petition of Samuel Hinckley to run the ferry from Wolfe Island to Kingston. He didn't get it, so he settled to assisting the gentleman at Port Putnam. Edward Kelsey ran the ferry there from the fort to Millen's Bay. It would eventually become. This is his tombstone in Cape Vincent. The ferries had a series of sails. They could be sailed. They were mostly rowed, but they carried anything and everything. They were quite common as freighters on the St. Lawrence River. View of Kingston, Upper Canada, in 1819. This is from what we call Fort Henry now. It was Point Henry back then. So you're looking over the naval yard and the village of Kingston in the distance. This is a harbor view of early Kingstown. There's a little scow ferry at the top of the picture. If you're familiar with the LaSalle Causeway going to Kingston today, this was Knapp's Ferry, it was called, and taking you over to the fort. Fort Frontenac, the barracks, the King's Wharf. Ironically, that's the wharf the ferry uses today. And this is Barrett Bay, straight across on Grand Isle, or as it was becoming more and more known as Wolfe Island, named by Governor Simcoe for the British general, who had never been here, by the way, had never ever laid eyes on his namesake. few documents granting Grand Isle to the British. The island was passed down to David Grant and Patrick Langan, two soldiers of the British Army, and their descendants. The descendants of Langan sold their shares, eventually everything going to David Grant's son, Charles Grant, and his wife, Carolina. They're buried in the Anglican Church on Wolfe Island. Charles is not. He's buried in their main residence back in Montreal. But the Baroness, the Baron was Marie Charles Grant, and she too is buried in Montreal. But her daughter-in-law became known as the Baroness. And this was a wedding present for the Baroness, which many of the islanders, including my dad, and probably of Hank's generation, which is a little before mine, sorry, I can't resist it, would remember this as the old castle. But my colleague and historian, the late Victoria Stewart, who is very familiar with the Longueuil family of Montreal, said, don't make the mistake of calling it a castle. This would not have been a castle to the Longueuils, the Grants. This was simply a summer chateau for them. So this is the most recent photograph of the castle in ruins, which eventually just fell down. It caught fire. Things happened in the 1930s, and by the late 30s it was gone. And today there's not even a foundation left of it. But this was where the owner surprised his wife with a summer chateau. It was also, in my own imagination, where the owner was also planning on a steamboat for the island. And it was eventually called the Wolfe, the very first steamer. And his good friend Archibald Hitchcock, Sam Hitchcock's son, was going to run this vessel. Unfortunately, this is the petition for it. And it would operate from Cones Point. If you're familiar with Wolfe Island, this is Mills Point, one of the closest areas for the ferry to Kingston. This is where they operated from originally. However, the steamboat was just too expensive, and they went back to sailing scows. The village of Mary's Port, which was named in 1858, and gradually through use became known as the village of Marysville. None of these piers, save for the wharf to the left, are in existence anymore. Our own pier, which the ferry lands today, is about where you see the Barrett Mill, or the end of St. Lawrence Street. Not quite to the Barrett Mill, I beg your pardon, it's a little more to the left. The wharf over there to the right was a ferry wharf, and it's nothing but a tree today in the middle of the bay. This is the village of Marysville. And upper Marysville, behind the church, was the Baron's house. About where it says Catholic was Elms Lodge, and that's where they lived. The castle, the chateau, would be farther to the left of the picture. This was the main ferry dock, called the Hitchcock House. Much later photograph taken around, I think, guesstimating about the 1920s, and the ferry no longer lands here. It's the larger pier to just behind the two gentlemen sitting on the boat. That was the main ferry pier. And this is a diagram of it. The Hitchcock Hotel. This was the main ferry house. And here is listed more of the ferry people. Kind of hard to read. We won't linger. There's no test. This part of the Hitchcock house was taken in many later years. This is torn down now, and the stonework is still there. It's the biggest place, the biggest house that was built on Wolfe Island at the time, 1835, by Archibald Hitchcock, and it became the center of operations for everything. It became the post office, the general store, the church, and Mrs. Hitchcock, who was Mary Hinckley, one of the UEL daughters, married Archibald Hitchcock, and she became the doctor for the village, and the first postmistress, and they lived here. The Ives brothers took over the ferries after the Hitchcock's bateau, and this is the ferry schedule. We have a few more trips than that from 1846, not many, but a few. The Island Queen, Captain Ives, leaves Kingston, 1, 2, 3, 4 trips, leaves Wolfe Island, 1, 2, 3, 4. Sounds like when we were on strike there a few years ago, I think we had one less. Yeah, not funny. A few more little 1848, a few more of the extra trips. Enter into Henry Gildersleeve, who had a dream, and he's part of the history of Wolfe Island simply because he wanted to cut it in half. Now, there had been rumor of a canal cutting through Wolfe Island, joining Kingston to the new port of Gravelly Point, which would become Cape Vincent. And the importance of this was the link of Kingston to New York City, linking Kingston to the eastern seaboard, as it were. Now, the St. Lawrence River was not a mode of transportation of any real importance. You had the rapids. Those of you who are quite familiar, and I know every one of you are, of transport on the St. Lawrence River, and it was hazardous. You had the rapids. We're not going to go into all of them. The Sheen Rapids, the Long Sault Rapids. You had to, coming downriver was, hang on for the ride. Coming back, forget it. You were walking the canoes and the boats more than you were afloat. So the main transportation to the big ports involved the Erie Canal. Well, Henry Gildersleeve had a dream that if you link the railroads to New York, and we can bypass this big island here, straight through to Kingston, Kingston will be a port, and a major one. We'll beat out York or Toronto, and the railroads will come here. Ferriage between Kingston and Wolfe Island. Tenders given up here. This is 1858. We've moved up there now. Enter into a gentleman born and raised, Sam Hinckley's son, Coleman Hinckley. This is the gentleman right front and center in the picture. He's in the second row with the beard. Young Coleman learned to sail before he could walk, legend goes, and he spent most of his life at Cape Vincent. But his claim to fame was a race that happened in 1841 in Kingston Harbor. And just for the fun of it, he challenged the British Navy, which was under the command of Commodore Sandham, who wanted to the Navy Yard, it fell to him to keep sailors in the port of Kingston, and the war was long over. The Rush-Bagot Agreement got rid of all of the ships. They had the stone frigate where sailors lived in. Well, they were landlubbers. Commodore Sandham said, let's show the whole world, or at least Kingston, what we're made of. Well, word got around like it does in Wolfe Island, and young Coleman Hinckley was bringing his ferry around and said to his brother-in-law, Archibald Hitchcock, he ran the ferry to Kingston, what do you say we enter this race? Well, the ferry scow did enter the race, and it won. Because when the cannon went off, the sailors went, and this is the truth, it just was haphazard, boats upset, two guys ran into each other, and Hinckley simply pulled into his jib, held on, and the old ferry scow just took off like something alive. And he beat them. Well, there was all hell to pay. I won't go up to Mr. Kinghorn just yet. I'll go back. And at the British American Hotel in Kingston, he cheated. That Yank cheated. See, Coleman lived in Cape Vincent. How dare this Wolfe Islander Yank beat the Navy? I challenge you again. Well, 2 weeks later they did. And this time only one of the British sailors showed up. And Hinckley came with his ferry, this time with Aunt Polly, his sister, and several passengers decked out in both the British flag and the American flag, and a whole set of pennants. You know what happened. He beat them again. The cup, the winning cup, is in the Hinckley family, and I haven't seen it yet. It still exists. No one is sure where, because I have begged Mary Hinckley Do you know where it is? I thought it was on display in their museum in Cape Vincent. It's not. One of the family hung on to it, jealousy, and it's hidden. It's in my closet. Nobody sees it. You know how, yeah. Anyway. But that's where I believe, few years later, let's go back up to the 50s, where forwarder George Matheson Kinghorn from Montreal came to Kingston and realized shipping on the St. Lawrence forwarding from Montreal and to Toronto was dying out because the railroads were taking over. Well, who is this Hinckley? What if the canal to Wolfe Island was started, it hadn't finished, it fell apart because the railroad got to Cape Vincent okay, the Ogdensburg Railroad, but it couldn't get through the swamp ward in Kingston, so the whole venture went bankrupt. Prominent men like Henry Gildersleeve, Dillon O'Calvin, who owned Garden Island, and another lawyer by the name of John A. MacDonald, all of their venture through this new canal went bankrupt. The ferry, which wasn't necessarily an auto ferry because cars don't exist, but it was going to transport railway cars from Canada, Upper Canada, straight down to New York. Well, the venture went bankrupt. Well, George Kinghorn, if we can finish this off, we've been promised funding from a Mr. Pierpont of Upper New York, and we can beat Overton Gildersleeve at the ferry trade from Kingston to Cape Vincent if we utilize this new canal. They met, and Hinckley was made a partner with George Kinghorn. This is Mr. Kinghorn of Montreal, and they started the most successful ferry venture to not only Cape Vincent, but to Wolfe Island as well. Here's a picture, an aerial picture of the canal, which they finished. And this divides Wolfe Island by the head and the foot. When I was a kid, we were told never to go east of the foot. Don't go there. I don't know why. And I was only down that way, I think, 3 times in my life when I was a kid. But that's the end of the most beautiful area of the thousand of islands of Wolfe Island, down through that way. But anyway, the canal divides Wolfe Island east and west. And if you're familiar with the area, off in the distance is Wild Lake, Ontario, and way down beyond to the right, and a long way down, is towards Gananoque. Well, taking a vessel to Cape Vincent, you got to watch the weather going around the head of Wolfe Island, because believe me, it gets very rough. And all the way down to the foot and back up is almost a day and a half of steaming. But if you could run through this little canal and carry freight, it'd be a success. Well, that's what Kinghorn and Hinckley did. They finished it, and their vessel, this was the pier that George Kinghorn purchased or inherited from his father-in-law, Richard Scoble. He married Elizabeth Scoble, and this is Brock Street. And they would operate from here. First thing that Mr. Kinghorn did was extend the pier at Brock Street. This is where, by the way, the Island Queen and the Canadian Empress operate from today. And the ferry from Wolfe Island operated from here for many years. This is its first beginnings, its humble beginnings. You can see the beginning of the railroad coming into the depot. So this was almost the end of shipping in Kingston. The depot station is just off to the right. The building is still there. And Kingston gradually became busy once more with shipping. Mr. Kinghorn's dock. There's an idea of where it is, the Gildersleeve Wharf. Scoble's Wharf is the dock we're looking at the foot of Brock Street. You can see the railroad has come in finally. Another little more detailed picture of exactly the same spot. And the Wolfe Island Ferry Wharf is at the foot of William Street. And this was where Mr. Hinckley and Mr. Kinghorn had their famous meeting, where they became partners. Scoble's Wharf can be seen way up near the top, where eventually the ferry would run. And here's the same area in a detailed drawing. Or we've gone back to our laptop, I don't know, let's hope, oh, we're good. And a little bit further down Kingston, the Marine Railway Wharf. That's the beginning of the, that's Power Shipyard, where all of the ships were built and where the dry dock would be open in another maybe 30 years. The Watertown, first of all, the Pierpont was built from timber, and that's her on the left, Kinghorn and Hinckley's first vessel with the arches. And then to the right was their second one, the steamer Watertown. And both these vessels went through the Wolfe Island Canal many times. But tragedy would strike soon. The Watertown was no sooner on the run that she caught fire, and on the port in 1864 at Cape Vincent, all hell broke loose in the town, and they had to cut her loose, and 4 people were killed, burned aboard. Advertisement for their first vessel, Coleman Hinckley Master. And this is when they operated out of the United States Wharf. And if you're familiar with Kingston, this is that big place called Crothers Wharf today.
What year is that?
This would be, I would say, about 1858, 1860. Coleman Hinckley's house today in Cape Vincent. This is the steamer Gazelle, and she was purchased from she did the timber run from Ottawa to Grenville and was for sale, and this was the first ferry that they purchased. And the Gazelle was on the Gananoque to Kingston run, and then they would interchange. The Pierpont would run to Wolfe Island, or the Gazelle would. And Archibald McClellan was her captain. Kingston, April 11, 1864. Tragedy would strike again. The Kinghorn Hinckley fleet, where the vessel was stuck in the ice. The Gazelle was stuck out by Garden Island. I mean, I was stuck last winter with a Wolfe Islander in the same spot, so nothing changes a whole lot. Only I didn't crawl around the propeller like Captain McClellan did to free it. So a fatal accident occurred December 23rd. Captain McClellan climbed up into the box to free it of ice. Coleman Hinckley came to break them out with the Watertown, and in doing so, he moved chunks of ice, and this caused the paddle wheel to move, jamming the captain up into the box and killing him instantly. And a picture of the newer Pierpont, Pierpont II. This is an 1871 picture. Pierpont with Coleman Hinckley Sr. heading out to to Cape Vincent, and the ferry steamer Gazelle ready to head over to Wolfe Island. You can see the market battery in front of the Kingston City Hall. The date on this is May 1871, but it might have been when the picture was developed, because this is spring breakup time. You can see the Navy Yard in the distance and Fort Henry up on the hill. An aerial view of the same place, the same dock, and George Kinghorn's office can be seen just to the left. This is the site of the Howard Johnson Hotel, and the Holiday Inn is to the top of the photograph today. But this is, I believe, taken in the 1940s. You can see the railroads coming, the rail tracks, they're all gone now. And that's Ontario Street and Brock Street leading down. This was the proposed depot where all the steamers went to Cape Vincent. Rome, Watertown, and Ogdensburg Depot at Cape Vincent, 1884. This was the proposed building. Didn't quite get that big, but that's it there. This is an actual photograph. The Pierpont is alongside here. That's the depot today. It's where you saw the rail lines. There's no railroad there today. It was dredged out, and it's now a marina. This is Coleman Hinckley's great-great-granddaughter, Mary Hitchcock Hinckley. Coleman Hinckley Jr. and his wife Linnie on the top deck of the Pierpont. And this is the ferry to Wolfe Island, operated by Olivia Spinning, who married Demetrius Spinning. Meanwhile, Sam Hinckley had died, leaving his ferry service to his two children, Coleman Hinckley and his daughter Olivia. Coleman went with George Kinghorn, and they started their ferry service in Kingston, and Olivia and her husband Demetrius Spinning continued the smaller ferry to the Cape by way of bateau and horse and sleigh. The mail must get through.
Can you go back to that picture? That was horsepower.
Yeah, yeah.
2 horsepower.
2 horsepower. Yeah, some of them were just 1. This was common. It was done down in different ferries. I know for a fact up at Wapoose in the county and over in Wolfe Island. It was short-lived. This is the only photograph I think of it. Normally they used bateau boats because this would be some wild crossing. It does get very rough between Wolfe Island and Cape Vincent. So they'd have this during the midsummer time. Mostly they ran the bateau boats. And the winter time, straight to Kingston, straight down the canal. When Captain Pike retired by Hiram Hitchcock, he was a captain with the Pierpont for many years. The steamer Maud was launched at the same time in 1871 as the Pierpont II by Overton Gildersleeve. And she would traverse the canal as well, carrying more passengers and freight. This is the Pierpont II, 1871, built in Scotland originally, then dismantled and reassembled in Power Shipyard. And she did the run to Cape Vincent, Wolfe Island, and downriver as well. The steamer Princess Charlotte was also on the Wolfe Island run, and the Gananoque run, wherever there was a paying cargo. This is Brock Street. It's almost the same today, some days. The Pierpont II is the first ship in the foreground. This is, again Kinghorn has sold his share to the Folger brothers, Benjamin and Fred Folger of Cape Vincent. So on their fleet, they bought the Maud from Gildersleeve, who is now out of the shipping business, and extended her several feet, and she did longer excursions. The Grenville was on the Gananoque run, and she can be seen to the left of the picture.
Question, Brian?
Yep.
All of these pictures are from the top of some building.
City Hall, I believe. Yeah. Probably the second floor of City Hall, because that'd be the only place really that you could get a good view.
Thanks.
The Maud became the America. Coleman Hinckley Jr. stayed with her. Now this is again at Brock Street with that new grain elevator where the Holiday Inn is. And the elevator would last until 1943 when it caught fire. And we all know that had a big factor. The Magdoma was alongside the slip beside the elevator the night it caught fire. And through a real rare photograph from Ron Walsh, whose father came down and took a picture, and the Magdoma is up with the huge flames behind her, and said, "Isn't that a shame? There goes the elevator, but there goes a beautiful yacht." No, the sailors cut her loose, full power, and backed right into the flames, and you know the rest. Saved the boat through their quick thinking and heroic efforts. But that's a quick little history lesson there when that went. The America down running through the rapids, and she was even afloat up to my time, 1954, up near Barrie as the Midland City. And then finally she was dismantled. Captain Coleman Hinckley Sr. is buried in Cape Vincent, and his wife Isabella. She christened many of the boats. George Kinghorn, buried in Montreal, he and his wife and their descendants. Wolfe Island was getting tired of a haphazard ferry service. What boat do we have this week? The big Pierpont or the Gazelle or nothing? So they went, petitioned, and there was much political debate at the turn of the century, and Thomas Fawcett was the reeve at the time, and part of a political platform is we're going to get our own boat. Well, hallelujah. The Tom Fawcett was built at Bertram Shipyard in Toronto and sailed down. But as you can see from the end-on picture, she's smaller than the Pierpont, a little bit bigger than the Gazelle, could hardly get through the ice. Not very happy, everybody was, but it was their own boat, finally. She was called the Tom Fawcett and only spent a year with her name on, and then the workers were told to paint the name out. Tom was beaten out for the reeve. Mr. Spoor, well, what's her name going to be this year? Well, they're going to call her the Wolfe Islander. And this is the boat under her new name coming to the Brock Street Pier. Ferry would also come here going to the USA. Both of them operated. This is the Tom Fawcett Wolfe Islander at Village Pier. The same dock I come into today in Marysville. Changed a little bit. It's extended out a little bit further. The ferry house has been moved, and it's now a private residence. And this, we believe, is the ferry coming. We're not really sure where. It could be Garden Island. It could be Breakey's Bay. It may even be the pier in the village, but I don't think so, not with the background picture. But this is an early picture that we've acquired. This is at the Richardson, the Brock Street dock. The elevator still there. A couple of cars. How many cars does she carry? About 5, give or take. Pull-out planks for a ramp. Captain James Crawford was her first captain. Not bad for an old girl. The boat, I mean. I believe that's Carmel Cosgrove, a very good friend, the late Carmel Cosgrove, taken on the top deck of the Wolfe Islander. Her uncle would be the purser on there for many years. There's a better picture of what the Wolfe Islander looked like from a model by Eugene Tarrant on display at the Marine Museum in Kingston. See the paddle wheel, car deck, passenger accommodation, pulling vehicles off. We do the same thing today. Not much has changed there. Eh? Yeah. This is where she'd come into the ice, where Coleman Hinckley would land in the ice, where the Ives brothers would land in the ice, because you couldn't get into the village. And the Wolfe Island Historical Society used this photograph for their, don't unplug that, pal, don't do that. And we use this as our letterhead, because it depicts everything about Wolfe Island, the rural setting, the ferry. Everything depends on the ferry. Still does. Nothing's changed. Your whole life, you can tell a Wolfe Islander because they're always looking at their watch. Okay? Oh yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, much more to that? Got to catch the boat. See ya. This was called an ice punt, and these boats would take you out either straight to Kingston or out to the boat, which is out by Garden Island, the same place where Captain McClellan was killed. And in this case, that would be about 60 years previous to this picture. Same spot, she'd only get in so far, and then you walk down. And if the ice was bad, you get into one of these boats. A real good picture I have here in the Marine Museum, what they look like. You can see the long pusher poles where you'd run. People would either sit in there. God help the guy sitting there while there's 4 of them out running. Or freight, cheese, and everything else that you can see that they're loading up, in this case milk. The deckhands think they have it hard today. Well, these vessels played a big part too, not just the ferry, but the ice punt, and you'll see shortly. Captain Alan MacDonald and crew This is about the 1920s. Captain MacDonald, I just did a story in both Thousand Island Life and the Whig Standard called Bonfire and Church Bells. And they're coming into the village bay just before Christmas. And departing Garden Island, snowstorm, got lost. Where the hell are we? Well, what would you do? I'd drop the anchor. But you can see, so you're between a rock and a hard place. There it is up there. Well, they had to pull hard over. He said, oh God, we lost it. All right, hard around. And I can still see Kingston. So they swung out and started heading out. Well, then the snow let up and okay, hard about. Bill Armstrong was the mate. And they came around. Well, somebody said, the boat's having trouble. Word got through the village. The boat, Captain MacDonald's having trouble. So we'll ring the bell, ring the church bell. I'll get Father Fleming to ring the bell. And then the United Church, we'll ring the bell too. Well, they came around and bells. Which one is it? Captain MacDonald's Catholic, okay? And Bill Armstrong was Methodist. Which one is it? Armstrong, is it the United, not United, Methodist. Is it the Methodist Church? I don't know, Cap, I can't tell. Will you not know the sound of your own bell? Beg pardon, Cap, you're Catholic, don't you? What's the difference? Goose Island's in front of one of them, that's the difference. They did get in. They lit a fire in the dock and the boat got in. But an interesting little tidbit there that happened one time. Could it happen again? Oh yeah, sure it can. Lost in storm. Guided to dock by bonfire and church bells was the British Whig. Great anxiety on island. There was no panic. No, those guys know what they're doing. Here's the freight, how much it cost for soap, bar of soap and biscuits. Barrels each, empty, full, cheese in boxes, bread, berries, auto truck, large. And this is only page 1. There was about 4 pages of this. There she is leaving Kingston, heading over to the island, going on the inside of Shoal Tower. That's all a marina today, couldn't happen. See the paddle wheels kicking around. Now on the other side, the ferry service went from the Spinnings, whose daughter married Tom Horn. And this is a picture of Bill Horn. In 1880, Grover Cleveland had just been elected president, and there was much merriment in the Cape Vincent area, and the Horns were really busy with their ferry service, with bateau scows. Make a long story short, Tom Horn and his son Bill left the Cape. One of Tom Horn's passengers, oh, I left my jacket back at the hotel. Cap, can you hold on? Young Bill Horn got across. His father did not make it that night. Their mother had him leave the lamp on all night. He said, I've seen your dad come across in the worst weather imaginable. He'll be across. Well, the next morning he didn't. So young Bill Horn went across, made inquiries. Yes, they did leave. Well, their uncle, Coleman Hinckley with the Pierpont, said, let me look around the shore. And Coleman Hinckley found the overturned bateau down by Carlton Island with one body floating beside it, but Tom Horn was never found. And this is young Bill Horn in this picture, who would be the grandfather of the Horn brothers today, great-grandfather, I should say. And this is a motorized boat pulling a barge, which is what they used for years. Another picture of their motorized barge. This is the Cape Vincent to Wolfe Island ferry. These were the ferries from Kingston to the Cape before the 30s, the Wabick, and their schedule. This is before the bridge, okay, the big Thousand Island Bridge. So there was a series of ferries all throughout our region and the river. The Haibu, 1935. Pierpont had since retired and was made into a barge, where she eventually just fell apart. The Horn brothers bought a brand new vessel called the Jacques Cartier. And she was a beautiful vessel, but too big for their operation. Now, my big question was, this is in the 1930s, this great big vessel, all steel. Meanwhile, the Wolfe Islanders held together with baling twine and chewing gum, and still a side wheeler. This is a propeller vessel. I said to Captain Fawcett, I said, this is where I'm running into a blank. Why didn't the township buy, you know, it's too big for their service, a little bit too expensive, and it certainly was for sale. And RF's Captain Fawcett said, well, Old Duff Cosgrove and John O'Shea was the reeve. And you know, they could look back 50 years. They couldn't see 5 minutes ahead. We don't need it. So the Cartier was sold downriver. Sold by Horns, Cape Vincent Eagle, 1938. That's her today, out of Trois-Rivières. Now, today, she's in dry dock in Quebec City. I'm not sure of her fate. They've got a smaller vessel. I took this picture in Trois-Rivières about 2010. That's the same boat you just saw. Meanwhile, Wolfe Island plucked on with their ferry service to Kingston. Yeah. Things are getting better. The gentleman on the right is Orville Tricky McDermott. And this man could, I'm not being sacrilegious here, but pretty much walk on water. He was one of the best icemen our region ever knew. He could literally walk on slush. And so could his horse, Minnie the mare. This is, Orville is spelt wrong. It's O-R-V-A-L. And they did the service and helped people across the island. Like all the islanders, if you lived in Wolfe Island, you knew the ice. But there was a handful of people, maybe 2 or 3, who could literally walk on slush. So you depended on them to get you back and forth. This is a picture of Philip Ryan, Orville McDermott in the middle, and Whitmarsh on the end, Freddie Whitmarsh on the end. This was after they broke through the ice about 3 times, but got themselves out. This is a newspaper picture. This is Orville McDermott, Minnie the mare, going across on a good day, few passengers. This is across when the water's up to the horse's knees. They're heading to Kingston. Way, way off in the distance. You wouldn't get in that thing to save your soul, would you? Look at it. And look, how much do you think those milk cans weigh? The horse looking around, sizing up the cargo, thinking, oh, God. And when they did get there and got their freight unloaded, whoops, go back a bit, Orville would get up into the hotel and maybe have a couple of spills, and the horse's sleigh was loaded, so she just left him.
Oh.
And just walked back to the island, picking her way across different areas. Different color of the ice, ooh, better not go there, but she did, because the horse knew that was the good ice. Maybe you and I would say, ooh, I think I'll go over this way. And sometimes Tricky himself got into the water where the horse would look at him. He had an ice bridge too, it cost you $0.25. That's another, I could go on a half an hour about that. There was always a ridge. Old Orville charged you $0.25 to go across. And that'd be what, equivalent to $10 maybe today. I don't remember either one of them. McDermott was still alive in my time, but Minnie the mare was long gone by the time I was born. Okay, the Wolfe Islander's getting old. What do we do? Well, Reeve Key says that she's all right. Well, then there was a boiler explosion killing engineer Edward Reed and Joe Morrison. They were scalded to death when the line let go in 1943. That was just about the last straw. Every year, if you're familiar with the river down by Wolfe Island, we're looking straight across Brophy's Point to Rogers Side Road. That's Milton Island, just above the milk cans to the right. And this area would usually open up first in the springtime. So the ice is getting too dangerous for even Tricky McDermott and too thick to get the ferry out. So they started using the Sharpies, the ice punts again, to load freight. And this worked very well. Ironically, this picture was taken, I'm told, 1 or 2 days before one of Wolfe Island's biggest tragedies, which is where 4 Wolfe Island men were drowned on St. Patrick's Day in 1946, just not even 100 feet offshore. The cargo shifted. As you can see, you're carrying people, you're carrying freight. Now, Captain Fawcett could name 2 or 3 people in this picture. I can't remember which ones they are, irrelevant here. But you can see just, you know, that you're pushing the envelope a little bit. Now, some of these cans are empty, some of them coming back to the island. There may be groceries and things. There'd be nothing in the cans in this picture as they're just approaching the shore. But this was the ferry to Wolfe Island in the spring, 1946. Those that were saved by the heroics of Wolfe Hogan and Cletus Guernsey. Mr. Guernsey to the left, Wolfe Hogan, and they're pointing to a couple of pieces of wood which they used as paddles. They were working on the lighthouse when they heard the cries for help and managed to free a boat which was frozen in the ground, prying it up with their fingers, getting it in the water, no oars, so grabbing pieces of wood from the floorboards and paddling out and saving the rest of the passengers. Bobby White, Wolfe Island, was one of them. I knew Mr. White. He never mentioned the tragedy. I've never heard anyone talk about it. Again, it's before my time. Hank, you probably remember it well. I don't. I wasn't there around. This was the newspaper clipping, the Kingston Whig Standard. And then the Wolfe Islander, on Dominion Day, 1946, was condemned. Then they had nothing. What did we do? So Coleman Hinckley's great-great-grandson, Elwyn Buck Mullen, and his father Raleigh, built a water taxi. I'll go back here. And that's her in the foreground. We'll see a little bit more about it. The gentleman here, Captain Oliver Davis, Engineer Sylvester Murray, and Purser Richard Spoor of the Wolfe Islander, are now laid off. Captain Lyle Dugan ran not a good picture, I apologize for that. They ran his pilot boat became a water taxi, taking people across that spring. And Elwyn Mullen ran a taxi service, 24 hours, just dial 31. How many digits do you got to dial to call the guy in the next booth today? Hey, and you will get a machine before you'll get him, okay? Audrey Mullen, Mrs. Mullen, is still around. Captain Buck has since passed on. Audrey, who was watching this, said, "We had 65 calls the one night, Brian." The Ministry of Transportation, when the boat's out of service, doesn't get that many. The Mullins, I said, she said, I counted 65 calls. When? Will? Can it? Won't it? Where is he? Wow. This is their first taxi, water taxi, Old Sadie, and that's Buck Mullen to the right. Winfield Woodman right in the foreground. Raleigh Mullen to the left, Buck's father. I'm not sure who the lady is, and Bruce Woodman, Winfield's brother, in the back. And this is aboard Old Sadie. Well, the Mullins also built a brand new vessel named for Buck's mother, Ola Hinckley, and his sister, Reba. This is built on Wolfe Island, and her purpose was to ferry people. There was jobs opening up in the late 40s, early 50s. The wartime was over, and Islanders were leaving the farm and going to these new factories in Kingston. Raleigh Gordon Roney built the boat. That's a picture of him. Sorry for the loss of his head. I'm not going to fool with that because I'll lose him too. There's a picture of the Rabola in later years. Buck had he'd take fishing charters out. Captain Fawcett said, I think we had 102 aboard one night going home. Where did you put them, on the roof? They had a horse aboard, getting a horse across, anything and everything, all hours of the night. The first year, Rebola had her Chrysler engine burn out, never cooled off, and they had to replace it in the spring. Meantime, the Reeve got 2 brand new landing barges built for the final assault in World War II in Toronto, never needed, never used. So these could be purchased, and they used these as a emergency ferry, for the larger vehicles. Carried about 3 cars or a couple of trucks, which was critical. The water taxis were full to overloaded, and these would carry much needed supplies of gasoline and oil and everything else to the farms. This is at the foot of Johnson Street at the Richardson Swift's Wharf. Wolfe Islanders condemned. She's tied up on the south side of the island. Plans of making it into a floating hotel. That didn't quite fall through because somebody fell through the floor. So that was the end of that. And then a dangerous fire in Marysville. Captain Buck Mullen then purchased a brand new, first time ever, fire engine for Marysville. They almost, it was so close to losing buildings, a bucket brigade got this under control, and there's so many wooden houses. The one you see in the foreground with the 2 windows facing us is my grandmother's place. Not at the time of this picture, but it's still up. And the fire was right in front. So it could have been a major disaster. So Captain Mullen purchased the first fire engine for the village of Marysville. This is in 1946. Well, plans were underway for a brand new ferry, and there were 4 in Collingwood, the Ottawa class vessels. These were built for the final assault in the China Sea. They were small little freighters that could move troops, freight, food, whatever, what have you, in shallow water. They were built for long duration, not for a real heavy sea, but they were available, and one was partially finished. So with a bit of work, there was one up on the boards at Collingwood. They drew up a set of plans, widened her, and she became the Ottawa Maybrook, was her intended name, and became the Wolfe Islander many people call the 2. It was never the Wolfe Islander 2. The other one was stricken off the record, so she simply became the MS Wolfe Islander. This is just before leaving Collingwood in 1946. This is the new ferry, ready to leave. Arriving in Kingston, November 18. Reeve Craig Russell. Gives me great pleasure to start the service. The big thing then was, she's too big. What are we ever going to do with something this big? We'll never fill her. Look at the size of the car deck. There's the band ready to start playing there. Look at the size. We'll never fill this thing. What do we need something so big for? First load that afternoon. This is at the foot of Clarence Street. And the first arrival at Marysville, where she'd run for the next 30 years. And she got christened a second time for the Islanders. Some of the kids couldn't make it in Kingston. So, oh, I'm sorry, I can't. Sadie Russell, hang on everybody, I'm going to go down a little bit. And she took her 5 tries to break the bottle. Bang, bounce back, bang, bounce back. Son of a gun. That's Wally Niles hanging over the side there watching it happen. And if you see early pictures of the village, he was everywhere. He's in the background of almost every picture. In the background by Mrs. Russell's hand is the original ferry dock at the Hitchcock House. And her load back to Kingston. She was free that whole week. And trouble with the ice, like her predecessors. Loading freight, pulling it on, whatever it took. Spring is coming. This was a big caption in the Kingston Whig Standard. When's the boat running? And then she caught fire. That looks worse than it is, just actual an oil fire, but the paper caught the picture. And then she blew away. 1950, the Whig Standard and CKLC News. Nobody knew where she was. It was an ungodly wind. And January 14, 1950, Captain Sebastian Joe Sisti. Now this is a picture taken much later, because look at the flag. It's got the 1965 Canadian flag. That wouldn't have been the case then. Plus a lot of other things I can notice that date the picture. But it's a good one of her in a heavy sea. Everybody thought she'd gone down. Somebody rang up. They were talking on the phone before the phone lines went down because of the high wind. It became over the time Hurricane Hazel. It was not Hurricane Hazel. That was in 1954. This is 1950, just a real heavy windy day. Before the ice, even. And Joe Sisti had been sailing in the Gulf, sailing in the Great Lakes, but oh my God, I never saw anything like this. She wouldn't answer her wheel, so he turned the wheel hard over to starboard, and let's head to the foot of the island, or someplace in the Thousand Islands, which was a good thing that he knew the river, because he had an idea where to go. So someone talking to someone, the story goes, on the phone, just happened to glance out the window, and I just saw the Wolfe Islander going by doing 60 miles an hour. Where are they going? And then she was gone, and nobody knew. And a couple of fellas picked her up with a telescope at the foot of Wolfe Island, riding the chain, riding her anchor, and everybody hanging on. You can picture it, laying straight out like flagpoles. But all was good. Wild gales here drive Ferry downriver. No one injured. McAdoo's barn blew out. Eva and Howard Abbott were aboard. Mrs. Marlowe. And the crew, Captain Sisti and crew. And later on, the ice would freeze up, and who'd be the first across? That's my uncle, D.J. Greenwood, Hank Geronimus. I think they're crossing about 4 inches of ice. Yeah, she should be all right. Hey, it's okay. And then Captain Mullen, I call him Captain, he wasn't at this time, but he operated a boat called the Saucy Sally, an ice boat. I'll switch ahead there. That's what she looked like. This carried passengers back and forth. That's Elwyn Mullen at the side. That's another picture of him. She's modified a bit. The engine's put down a little bit lower, like it's way up at the top there. That had to be top heavy and dangerous. And he realized that too, so he had the engine put down. And this is a archive picture from Queens of Buck in the harbor. This is a cartoon in the Whig Standard. Somebody ought to fill up the holes in this road. And this was commonplace. Few old cars, when the ice got dangerous, people had to get to work, so the ice people took them across. Such is life. Sometimes it wasn't so good. Mr. Ogle, not so lucky. And then the Wolfe Islander would be out in the spring. And then the water came up, 1951. This is before the Seaway. And Horn's got a new vessel. This is the first picture, 1952. If you're familiar with Cape Vincent and Horn's Ferry, this is one of the first pictures. And that'd be, I'm not sure the gentleman, I think it's Bill Horn, Jr., not, his father was Bill. Captain William Horn Jr. again, the brand new boat. Landing at Cape Vincent. This is the same one that still runs today. Captain Elwyn Mullen and R.F. Fawcett were the two captains on the Wolfe Islander, 1958. and Buck Mullen and Elwood Woodman. You saw Elwood in the first of the presentation standing on the ice. I well remember that's the inside of the Wolfe Islanders wheelhouse. The schedule. A few more trips. Close to what we have now, actually. Quite close. 40 cents for an adult, 15 cents, car and driver, $1.50. This was Buck in later years, I'd say this about 1970, this picture was taken. Bringing the stone crusher across. I couldn't believe it when I saw that picture. That is a heavy load for the Wolfe Islander 3. And I said to Captain Fawcett, you took that across? He said, yeah, we had water coming up the scuppers by the time we cleared Garden Island. Whoa. And up near the head of the island, then she'd go across to Simcoe. Up at Flynn's Dock, they called this. Nothing there today but sticks and piers broken up. This is my favorite picture of all time. This is Buck Mullen, Audrey, and young Darrell, who's now one of the captains of the boat. My book called Fairy Tales from Wolfe Island, this is the cover I would like. This says it all, how life was like on the island. And then they had to get up from the ice, because you could only get in so far. I didn't remember this, and my uncle told me we never really came across to the island when this was going on, when the boat would land in the ice, because it would only do it for about 3 or 4 days, and then that was the end of ferry service. So we took you across the ice later when it was safer. Instead of going up these planks, we just drove right across 3 miles. Yeah. Just picture doing that today. somebody's exhaust ripped out. Yeah. And before the boat would tie up for the winter, they tried to get as much supplies as they could. So this is the ice in the village bay. These pictures were, these later ones of Captain Buck Mullen's collection on slides are as fresh and as good like they were taken yesterday. Salvage Prince played a big part in ferry service. She was the actual ferry in 1955 when the Wolfe Islander got damaged. She was making the dock just about where these gentlemen are, out in the village. This is bringing supplies from Kingston all the way across. Well, the horse and cutter, horse and sleigh, whatever it was, coming out to meet the boat, and that's heading from the village to Kingston. This is what you'd see. As they were meeting the boat, as the horse and sleigh came alongside, Johnny O'Shea said, "Pick up your coat, Joan, the sleigh's here." We put our coats on, we looked out the window, and the sleigh was gone. It had about 17 people aboard, most of them kids, older ladies, and the horse and sleigh got too close, and George Bates, the captain, saw what was going on, and suddenly everything broke through the ice. Everybody was in the water. It was about, I would say, minus 17. You know, the cold weather we just had, everyone in the water. Bates jumped to the side of the wheelhouse and said, nobody panic, we'll get you out. And not one soul was lost, including a small baby. Young Eddie Bates jumped over the side and helped the crew. He was working with his dad, and they got a big gangway out, and piece by piece, they picked every kid out, every lady, every person. Fern Small had a newborn baby, and she, very cold in the water. She said, "You became lethargic." And, "Oh, the baby's gone. I just had a hold of her. Oh, what a shame," she said. "What a shame." Well, there was the baby floating on a buffalo skin blanket. And young Bates very carefully pulled the baby over. And the baby was taken immediately to the engine room, where engineer Pat Casey ripped open his coveralls, put the baby against his own skin, and then, before he ripped open his coveralls, he laid her on the rocker arms of the engine, and then ripped open his own coveralls and ripped open her clothes and got her right against his own skin, thereby saving her life. The baby is... He went with the sleigh. What's the horse's name? I can see it. It'll come to me. Yeah, horse and sleigh were lost. This is a picture of Fern and Daryl Small, taken about 6, 7 years ago, and that's the baby in the background. That's young Holly, looking at the original photograph. I did a story for the Whig Standard for their 50th anniversary. Both Mr. and Mrs. Small are gone now. They both have since passed away. But she said to me, that is as real to me as if it happened 5 years ago. Not 50, 5 years ago. We never returned to the island at Christmas time ever again. And she was born and raised. She was a Fawcett. And young Holly there was the baby who was floating on the blanket. And life went on, plucking away. Should be safe. Yeah. Other vehicles and modes of travel across the ice. Mr. McAdoo. That's Captain Daryl Mullen sitting on somebody's car. Daryl said, "Can you picture what would have happened to Dad if the police had saw him taking this picture?" It's one of my favorite ones. I said, "They get the car out?" He said, "I don't remember. I don't have any idea. Whose was it?" He said, "I don't remember either." But he said, "I do remember Dad saying, 'Climb up on there.' So the dog and I got up on the car. This is out in the middle of, just past Kingston Harbor. Yeah, the boy survived. He's my colleague now. This is the ice road towards the spring. You sometimes had to splash through the water. And just ahead of the tractor is Wolfe Island's, that's the Tyner LaRush House. That's our Old House Museum today. That is the Wolfe Island Historical Society's pride and joy. It's reputedly the oldest house on Wolfe Island. It was originally a schoolhouse, a store, and just about everything else, built even before the Hitchcock House. So that's our museum today. Anyway, back to the picture. They got it out. That truck you see way up there is backing down with a long chain and rope, and they pulled it out. This is out by the ferry dock. You can see one of the Christmas trees just to the right ahead of the boy there, and these were spaced about 20 to 30 feet apart. And these are what you followed in a snowstorm, so you knew you were safe. Yeah, you were safe. All right. The ice was, that's a picture. Again, I'm sorry for Mr. Greenwood's head gone. But more important, there's the ice block, so we won't worry about that. This is cutting her out in the spring. That's a long way to Wolfe Island with a chainsaw. Hey? This is off Brock Street. The boat would back up, the guys would get out of the way, and she'd give it all she had. The forefoot of the Wolfe Islander was filled with concrete. Okay, right where the orange paint you see there in the bow, that was filled with solid concrete. And she'd have her troubles. The Wolfe Island Airline, operated by Gene Mannion in 1962, I remember that, flying over. This is when the ice would be bad. Their adventures in themselves. Fairy Tales does cover it. Horns Dock, springtime damage. All they could do was simply watch. Horns Ferry in the village. She would break the Wolfe Islander out. She'd spend usually the winters in Marysville, tied up alongside the dock, and then Bill Horn would, she was quite powerful and would dance around the ferry to get it running. That's her today. Not bad for an old girl.
5 cars on her dead.
No, she carried 12, about 12. Yeah, one lower the ramp and one guy would park out on the ramp. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Do you remember the news about 3 years ago where the van went over the side? Yeah. Poor old George had ended up with a heart attack on that one. They just cleared Cape Vincent. It was in the fall. The people got out of their van, and for some reason it was left in neutral, which, you know, you can see this happening with a Standard, but left in neutral, and she started to roll in the swell, and the captain, the other guys are on their way upstairs or in the wheelhouse, and just the one vehicle aboard because it's late in the year. The van rolled ahead and hit the ramp. And then before the captain's like, hey, what the, rolled back, hit the back ramp, bang. Popped the little safety hinge, the little catch, and over the side went the van. And I said, you know, it just makes, you know, my hair would literally, well, it wouldn't go white, would it? It'd go back to its color.
Whiter.
Whiter, that's impossible. And so they got a line on it,
Was the last weekend.
and they managed to save it. They got a piece of rope. The two guys on there, Bruce and young Coffey, got a hold of it, and then George isn't doing anything. You know, like, the hell is he? Bruce went upstairs, and there's the captain, collapsed on the deck. I think Gabriel had already had him halfway out the door, heading to heaven, or suddenly pounded on him, and by this time, the alarm went off in the village, and the paramedics and everybody were there. Thank God it happened where it did, when it did, and George was rushed to hospital to Watertown, eventually to Syracuse, eventually to Kingston, and he's great. But one of the first words he said to his brother when he came to and was sort of coherent was, "What do you mean you shut down? We still had 2 weeks." Hey, okay, enough of that. Back to Kingston, the harbor. This is all gone now. This is when the canalers would come in. Again, a nice photo. I believe that's Captain Leith Davis bringing that freighter in is the reason for the picture. Buck took the picture.
What year would that?
That would have been 58. I think the most of these pictures of these color, Buck's cousin was in Rochester, and they were trying an experimental type of film. So he came up with a whole stack. He said, pictures of anything, Buck. Here's the camera. We just want to see how these work out. And a legacy was born. Otherwise, none of these would exist. And they're all on slides. 1964, the water was so low, they had to literally bulldoze and pull the Wolfe Islander into the dock right over the mud.
How to get her on.
Well, then she'd go full ahead on a spring line, on a bow line run, and then full astern right out. Mud, crap. But then they'd hit bottom about 3 times on the way out of the bay. You know, just stuff that a mariner would just, oh, what was that? Bottom? No, she lasted through it. That's when they built the dock at Dawson Point. We've got to have someplace deeper. Well, 2 new boats were on their way, the James Curran and the John McPhail. And they both were lost in a storm in '64, being towed by the tug G.W. Rogers in Lake Huron. They were to take the place of the Wolfe Islander. They'd be free, and they would operate from Brophy's Point, where you saw the tragedy, to Rogers Side Road, where a new highway would supposedly be built. And word got out that we get these new boats, we'll never get our bridge. Because bridge talk had been going on for the island since Sam Hinckley, since way back. We need a bridge, we need a bridge. The boats, oh, and you saw how life could be. Well, we get these 2 new boats from the Department of Transport, we'll never get our bridge. So the boats sank in a storm in Lake Huron, and rumor had it that when the divers went down and got near one of them, it said a bridge booster was wired to one of the rails. Whether this is true or not, there's no picture. They were never salvaged. Meanwhile, life went on the island, crossing the ice. One of the ice pioneers, Noble Staley, again, played a very big part on getting things across. And the Wolfe Islander plucked on. Good only on regular trips. I don't know what that means. You have an idea how rough it can get up in Kingston? This could be taken, I got a couple of shots from the 3, so almost the same. What year is it? Well, there's the cars. St. Mary's is still the tallest building in Kingston. In that picture, not the case today. Yeah, about 58, 59. Yep,
by those stores.
yep. The boat was joined by a vessel from New Brunswick called the Romeo and Annette. And she would run for the next 10 years as the Upper Canada. And she was running the night of November 1975, the night the Edmund Fitzgerald went down. And I called that story the Great Gale of '75. When Wayne Eves was captain, they tied the Wolfe Islander up because she'd only take off downriver on them again. Everybody knew that, so they just ran the one ferry. And Wayne said, we had solid water coming right over the flagstaff of the bow. Larry Staley showed up with a truckload of cows. I got to get these to Kingston. All right. I would, I'd say, what are you doing? But on they came. And that truck and cows and Staley were all over the deck by the time they got to Kingston. They were here, they were there, bawling all the way, all of them, including the guy in the cab. Foot almost cramped because he's got the brake on. Why? Slid, cows bawling all the way across. Wayne said, all I could do was roll up the window and hope they didn't knock the ramp out. Schedule of both boats, the Wolfe Islander, the Upper Canada. Our service had never been as good. There was a boat almost every half hour. Horns Ferry schedule. And that's the picture coming into George Kinghorn's dock, the original Scoble dock. Aerial photo of her making the pier. I know exactly what year this is. It's 1972 because I operate the dive boat, which is at the Holiday Inn, tied up there on the little corner. So I was able to date the picture very closely. Silhouette of, very familiar to many on Wolfe Island, the salvage Monarch pulling the Wolfe Islander. Snake Island's got trees on it. It's nothing but a shoal today, but it looks like a little tropical island out there. The new radar set, Captain Frank Mason and Lauren MacDonald. My first glimpse into that was, what are you looking at? What is that? And then the tug lost her rudder. I just had this posted on a site. Joanne, you had it up a couple of times? Yeah. And there was about 20 people aboard, 1972 again. She was out there for a couple of days. Tug got repaired, back in service. Better picture of the Monarch breaking the boat out. I ran Bishop's tug, the PJ Muir, breaking the Wolfe Islander 3 out in 1980. So I know the nights are very long and all of the hazards of breaking ice with it. The new boat, which would replace the Wolfe Islander and the Upper Canada, was called the Pierre de Sorel. And she came to Kingston from the Sorel area. Didn't quite pan out, that's her today. Never used. She's back in Montreal, by the way. This is a Hamilton picture. She was taken back to Montreal. New bubble system laid in for Kingston. The keel laid for what was to be called the Wolfe Islander 2. New ferry gets name, will be christened the Wolfe Islander 2, because there was never a 2. Well, it got talked about, there was the Wolfe Islander, then the Wolfe Islander Part 2. Is that, we're almost there, hang in there, hang in. God. So you are invited, cordially invited to the launching of the Wolfe Islander 3 by Mrs. Molly Apps in Thunder Bay. And in she goes. August 15th, 1974, the brand new boat slides into the water sideways. I have those flags, by the way. The one at the top and the one right here, the Canadian flag, were presented to me about 5 years ago. A gentleman, once the vessel arrived in Kingston, our boss, Doug Thompson, said to this man, put these away in your desk, we'll bring them out on occasion. Well, they went in his desk and they collected dust. And the man retired and he said, well, what'll I? And he said, oh, there's one person maybe who'd know what to do with them. He got in touch with me and they fly on the boat on her anniversary now. We have them up. We didn't put them up this February because what was February 5? They would have been torn to ribbons.
Yeah, balloons.
Yeah. So we have them up in the summertime on her August 15th date. This is her getting fixed up, putting on the wheelhouse, just before her final paint. Into her true colors. The Ministry of Transportation and Communications takes possession December 3rd, 1975. And she departs, the sleeping giant, for a trek down to Kingston, just 4 weeks behind the tragic sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald. Aren't you guys nervous heading out in that thing, said the shipyard workers. Now these are veteran shipmen up in Port Arthur. And a 10-year-old giant freighter just disappeared. Nobody has any idea what happened to it. Did it go into space? Did the spaceman get it? Where did it go? Because at this time, they're still not sure of her location, but it disappeared. And out goes this thing, little motorized barge, islanders on it. Oh, they know what they're doing. We'll be all right. This is 4 weeks after the tragedy. They made it. These are the gentlemen responsible for her propulsion machinery. Everything was new to them. Chief Engineer Winfield Woodman to the left. I just did a story on Winfield on his first solo, 1950, where as soon as he left the ground, he was only a kid, 17 years old, and his engine cut out. And as my dad said, had it been anybody other than Winfield, they'd have been killed. Winfield's calm demeanor just knew the problem. There's a problem here. I better fix it. And he had seconds to react. That's a story in itself. That's the gentleman who looked after all of this brand new nightmare, he said, of a ship where something has tripped, who knows where, why, followed by the gentleman in the middle who became chief engineer, Eldon McCready, and Jim Barry. Very, very knowledgeable men in something, learning something every minute of every day with this brand new boat. Captain Louis Keel was her master coming down the Great Lakes with Captains R.F. Fawcett and Harold Hogan. This is out on her trial run. First time in Kingston, December 16th, 11 o'clock. Photo by Elaine Barry. Covered in ice. Again, Eldon McCready, the late Jim Barry, and the late Doug Thompson of MTO Ferry Services. I'd like to welcome this new boat. You saw the picture of Craig Russell. Well, that's Reeve Tim O'Shea inaugurating the service on February 5, 1976 of the brand new boat. We can make her go sideways. Oh yeah. The wheelhouse has changed quite considerable since Captain Keel's picture here. The consoles are much bigger. Same principle, steering fore and aft with 2 joysticks. Your left hand steers the stern, your right steers the front. The radar sets have been long replaced. Everything in this picture is replaced. No, the gyro compass to Captain Keel's right there in front, that's still there. They still run. And then she had breakdowns. And then the ice problems. Ferry might run tonight, yeah. You can imagine. Islanders hanging in there. That's a way of life. Leave the tug, so they used the tug John D. But she got the bugs ironed out. This is a Port Weller trip with my good friend Captain Harold Hogan, who is wearing the red ball cap. Captain Dunk Hoare, who was the second watchman on the bridge, the first mate for the trip, and wheelsman Lauren McDonald. And big Kelvin Hughes radar, long gone. And that's what she looks like in Port Weller. And the writing's on the wall, Wolfe Islander 3 and Wolfe Islander 2. What to do with the Wolfe Islander? Well, she went to the Marine Museum for a bit, but they had a better one. So the Comet Foundation bought the Wolfe Islander and took her out to a spot off Dawson Point. And this priceless picture the ferry Ribola, Buck Mullen's Ribola, is tied up alongside the tug, where the two of them would have run way back in the 40s, together all the time. Captain Buck Mullen being interviewed on his knowledge of the history of the boat on board the Wolfe Islander. People milling about. The tug Daniel McAllister, which is now in Montreal, Ribola. And Whig reporter, not Ian McAlpine. His name escapes me right now. But they just welded a plaque onto the bulkhead by the engine room. And people are departing the deck of Wolfe Islander. You can see Buck just climbing over the railing there onto the tug. And Buck Mullen watching the proceedings from his own boat. And then she was gradually, sea cocks all opened, and she started to sink. A lot of memories went there. And then she was gone. I'll go back there, yeah. This is off Dawson Point, where she's a dive site now. The replacement ferry for backup was the ferry Charlevoix, which became the Frontenac II and is now running at Amherst Island. And she's been updated since this picture. The Frontenac II and the Wolfe Islander III. Since then, Captain Buck Mullen, Coleman Hinckley's great-great-grandson, has since passed away, and this is his gravesite on Wolfe Island. Captain R.F. Fawcett, again, you saw their earlier pictures, played a very big part in ferry service, and he's buried at the Anglican Cemetery on Wolfe Island. A younger gentleman who became captain in 1980, whatever became of him? Well, he got a little older too. Hey? Yeah. How many Austin Minis can you fit in the Wolfe Islander, we asked one time? How many? There were 72. Big rally in there. It was a joke. And all of a sudden, one day it happened. Over they came. We normally carry 55 cars, but we had about 72 on her that day. That was some time, about 10, 15 years ago. And then she turned 35. Happy birthday. She's turning 40 this summer. A typical day coming out of the same dock as you saw earlier, same dock that they were pulling the stuff off the older boat. Ribola can be seen up in the boathouse to the right, up on the blocks. She's still there to this day. And there's another crossing into Kingston like you saw earlier. Unloading in Kingston, another load coming over. Life goes on, a little bit water on the deck. This is what you see with the boat coming in. This is how we see it. My mate Joe Goodrow bringing her alongside. This is a view over Joe's shoulder. We're just looking at one thing making the dock, just one thing only. And that's lining up that one mooring bollard to a cylinder where that rope is hanging. Line her up, you got everything right on the mark. We take a Bic pen, you know how you take the little bottom part off, and stand it on the counter. Leave the pen standing. Yeah, good stuff. You better not feel that boat touch anything. Well, there are days where it would. Gales of November, we call them. Yeah, that was pretty much like last fall out here. I bet you hate it when the ice comes. No, actually, I'm kind of glad to see it come, because till then we're covered in ice. And some of the Facebook pictures, which didn't exist when these were taken, there was no such thing, but layers and layers of ice. I think we had 200 ton of ice on her in the early 80s. When I came to work that one time. She was just coated. And all night long, all you do is swing a hammer. And life goes on like it did. For Sam Hinckley, Sam Hitchcock, all the way up through the Ives brothers, Kinghorn and Hinckley, the Folger brothers, the township, and MTO. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, yeah, quit now. Any questions for anyone?
Just a comment. In 1965, I was just starting Queens,
Mm-hmm.
and three friends and I were on Wolfe Island on a Sunday.
Yep.
And a storm came up. And we were told that the ferry was downstream someplace, a baby on board, and we couldn't get, they said that there would be no service. Now fortunately, and the wind was so strong
Yep,
that
yep.
we actually were riding along quite happily and were knocked right over. But an islander came with a pickup truck, saw us, put us in the back, took us down to the end of the island, to a dock. That's my memory. And that's when he found out that the ferry, there's not going to be ferry service. Now, all of that was not a problem. The problem was convincing the Dean of Women at Queen's University, because those were the days that women were not out after 11 o'clock if you lived in residence. So I called in. We were staying with an elderly lady in the village
Okay.
who had a fishing.
Woodman? Mark Woodman.
I built that.
Yeah, yeah.
That sounds familiar.
Okay.
In any case, she assured the dean that there was a storm going on, that I had not concocted this story and so forth.
The boat was downriver. That was with Louis Keel, I think.
I'm just wondering if
Yeah.
that picture that you had that had the Canadian flag that didn't seem to fit 54 might have actually been.
It could have. That was a typical day, I think. That really wasn't that rough, although it looks it. She did go downriver again on Louis Keel. I do remember that one. And got behind Milton Island where he just dropped the hook and rode it out. Not like Joe Sisti where they thought she was gone.
But it was very
Yeah.
exciting for us, but we weren't local, so I'm just picking up all
Yeah.
that I remember at that time.
Okay.
So it's fine.
Yeah, Hank would remember that. Even the first one.
Just a question, I don't know much about Wolfe Island, but I've heard a lot of people mention how they put so many windmills on there for power generation. Has that really spoiled the whole island?
Well, we don't see them. I don't see them now. And I'm looking at them every single day. Coming out of the harbor, I steer on 1 and 2, where I used to steer on the CKWS radio towers. Now I steer on a couple of them. Who was it? Elaine Barry, whose pictures were at the end. Jim Barry was her husband, engineer. She said, Brian, we thought the telephone poles, the hydro poles, were ugly. Because that came in the 40s. One of my favorite island stories, when it was till after wartime before my dad's house got electricity. And in the schoolyard, Johnny O'Shea said to young Jack Johnson, Jackie, get a hat pin from your mom and stick it in that new outlet. What happens? He said, just watch. All sorts of weird stuff. Wow. So Dad asked Nana for a hat pin. No, I got a bobby pin, Jack. So Dad stuck the bobby pin in the outlet and went across the room. Nobody thought it'd kill you, just about kill you. Blacked out the house. What do you do? He said, well, why did you do that? Because Johnny said it would. Said it'd be neat. Yeah, neat, all right. So yeah, that was, Mrs. Barry said when the lines went up, oh, they're kind of ugly. But again, there's been controversy. Can anybody, how many wind turbines are on Wolfe Island?
68.
Good, but wrong.
86.
Numbers are right. Just turn them around. Wrong.
I am dyslexic.
I thought it was 84.
86.
But it is
Yeah, 86. Yeah.
Are they the real tall ones, like they put down north of Iroquois?
About 400 feet. Yeah, 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 yeah. A friend of mine, our founder of our historical society, the late Vicki Stewart, ended up with one in her backyard, and of course she wasn't too happy about it. And for her birthday, I finally took off old Herb Armstrong's mailbox, got her a mailbox for her birthday, and we got a farm scene for the the door. And the scene had a farmhouse, a little pump, and a big maple tree. So I said to the lady who was going to paint this on the box, I said, listen, the house has to be yellow, green roof, black pump, and instead of the maple tree. She said, are you serious? I said, yeah, she'll love it. Oh, you son of a bitch. But it's true. It's a true picture. I think along came Ed Edmansky with the snowplow and took out the whole thing the following winter. But I wished I had it. I wished I took a picture of it. But then I should have. I never thought to put the picture in. I got a good picture of her standing by her house with the turbine right over her head. Just all that little bits of humor.
How did all the blades for the turbines, et cetera, get over it?
Everything came by tug and barge from Ogdensburg. You guys would have seen them going by here in Brockville all the time by a special service. But we have had one blade come across on the Wolfe Islander, and it takes up the entire ferry, right from fore to aft. Getting it around Princess Street, I forget what happened to the poor guy. He just couldn't make the corner, and he had to back up 8 blocks with a turbine up Princess Street till he finally made a corner. I don't remember which one, but there was just a certain way that every bit of skill this driver had, and he was good, just couldn't get him around this one corner. So all the way back up to the top.
We've seen them, we work at the Thousand Island Tower, and we've seen them go through, so one tractor trailer per section of blade. Now, it's been a long time, we haven't seen any more. Barb remembers seeing them come up on the boats.
Okay.
Okay?
Mm-hmm.
And from the top of the tower, you can see all of,
We can count 72.
yeah,
Oh, from the distance?
yep.
Oh, that's impossible.
And first thing in the morning, they look like fine grasses covered in hoarfrost in the winter.
Oh, man.
Come around.
I've heard them called that.
They're dark.
Yeah.
And if nothing else, regardless of what, oh geez, this is, this wrecks the scenery and this does this,
Oh.
and people ask occasionally.
Mhm.
And so the next thing is, I said, well, I don't know what goes on there, but it certainly makes it a lot easier to answer your question from here.
Well, one of the views, you'll see them in the distance, coming down Division Street, if you're familiar with Kingston, like from the Battersea area. Oh my God, look at that. Coming from Clayton, New York, towards Cape Vincent, whoa, who could live in that forest? Coming up the one road towards Clayton, whoa. Like everybody has a reaction. I've driven across Wolfe Island from the village out the highway and not seen one. Not even noticed it. Whether you're so in tune, whether they seem to back up. But we all said, I said, my granddaughter's never going to know Wolfe Island any other way. The people I do, who is it? I think Heather Posthumus, Hank. Somebody has a shadow coming every day through their living room. I said, ooh, that would be bad. That would be bad. Other than listening to a whoosh, I mean, I've lived by the railroad tracks my whole life. I don't hear them. And you live by the highway, you don't hear it. But I said, yeah, this would be hard to handle, for a while. Coming through you would feel that'd be hard to take.
That would be me.
Yeah,
Sure.
yeah.
When will your book be available?
I've got today, Growing Up in Wolfe Island, available, and a few new of our Windward Wolfe Island historical papers. Fairy Tales is almost there. It's done. How it ends? How do you end something like this? Totally different from here. I go into a lot more detail. I go into a lot earlier. For instance, just to talk a little bit about the namesake, Fairy Tales from Wolfe Island. It starts with a little Haudenosaunee, a little Indian boy leaving Brophy's Point, 1673. And the whole idea behind the book is transportation and what happens and what he's on. And he ends up hearing these big canoe de matre coming up behind him, and it's Frontenac and his bunch coming up for the time of Skeenan in Kingston. History goes on all the way up. And one of the big questions to me, what happens to the Indian boy? There's another writer friend, Teresa Greenwood, said, Brian, you had me. Like, oh, wow, what happens here? And then all of a sudden he fades out. What happened? Well, I said, I don't know. He fades into history. Well, listening at this same time when this was happening, our Wolfe Island Historical Society was founded. The lady from Montreal moved to Wolfe Island. Wouldn't it be great to start up without going into a lot of things? Victoria Stewart and Professor Brian Osborne were talking the one morning about the Fort Frontenac and the treachery of Governor Denonville. And I get up and leave the room because I don't know what you're talking about, and someone's going to ask me a question in a minute, so let's get out and I'll just pretend I never heard. Well, what they were talking about was when the Indians were sold as slaves. And I'm just, I don't remember ever hearing about that. And later on, I think that Sunday, I said to Vicki, what happened about this treachery of Denonville? And Hank and I certainly know Victoria. She said, well, if you'd been paying attention, I said, I've got the count of 10 before I'm going to put this phone down back on the receiver. And she said, well, let me just look it up. And this is where the Indian boy, I said, my God, Vicki, they said they were captured and sold downriver. And this is, of course, the rebuttal, of course, what happened at Lachine, what happened to everything. Well, it became fascinating, and it tied into our Wolfe Island history. I said, Vicki, the Indian boy would be 20 years old. What if? She says, go on, go on. I said, now you've got it, and this is what held the book back. All that part was rewritten. It was history, it did happen, and it all made sense. Without giving you the end of the book where you just saw pretty much everything going up into, the book ends in the year 2008 with the arrival of the first turbine. 2 kids are skipping stones. They pick up another stone, another kid picks up something a little shinier, a little bit longer, a little bit bigger. Ooh, this is a piece of pottery. Didn't Grandma say there was an Indian village nearby? I'll leave the rest to your imagination, but that's where it ends. And I said,
Do you have a website to find the books at?
my Facebook page, if you like me, I'll let you on it. I don't have anything yet.
The Historical Society has
We do have a page, Hank, about the Historical Society, but it's got to be brought up to date. But I can give you any information on it, whatever we have. And I mean, everybody will know when this book is out. It's done it was to be done in the fall. It is. I'm just going through the final stages of it.
Let my group know and then I...
Oh, absolutely, Joanne. Yeah. Incidentally, Joanne Crack, who runs the Facebook page for the Prescott Anchor, thank you for your advertising and helping me out big time. Everything helps. My wife made me get a Facebook page because I was bumping into hers all the time and adding comments. Okay, all right, you're going to, I don't care about, laughing out loud. Isn't this funny? I don't do that. Okay, you saw how much I was laughing with this. But it's the social media has sort of taken over, and it is a great way of advertising and bringing up stuff that otherwise wouldn't be done, or we'd be doing emails and stuff, which is all I sort of learned not too long ago. My first 5 pages of fairy tales were a typewriter. Buck Mullen and 6 articles from the Whig Standard, typewriter. Can you send me that on a floppy? I said, Mr. Lucas, what's that? He said, geez, I could have had it in Saturday. All right, well, I'll do it next week. So through trial and error, and then running a disc, and again, my colleague Vicki Stewart running with a disc to the Whig Standard, because I'm stuck on the ferry boat. He wants that in now, and he put it up. He said, this isn't the right one. Vicki going all the way back to the house, searching through stuff and finding it, where today, click, 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 it's there. It's funny how stuff all changes. And then from typing out a thing, and then priceless photographs left at the paper, and geez, they were right here on the desk. I said, these aren't mine. I better find them, and they turn up. All simple today, all simple today.
I think we have to call it to an end, Brian.
Yes, I do have with me some books. If you are interested in picking up Growing Up on Wolfe Island, which was done by the Wolfe Island Heritage Committee, and was dropped in my lap. What can you do with all these interviews? Well, we turned it into the time my dad grew up on Wolfe Island.
Thank you very much for coming, everyone. There is a free tour at 1. If anybody's still available, it's 1. You can come back. And tomorrow the lecture is lecturers are Sandy and Dave Wells, and they're going to talk about their book, The Last Front, People's History of Mallory Town and the Front and the Township of Young. So if
I
you'd like to
think
come,
we
same
should-
time tomorrow.
We should give a special thanks to the gentleman that got this prize.
Who did this? Did he? Is he still here?
Was it you?
Yes, it was. Thank you very much. This would not exist only for. Thank you, because I was prepared to.
John's one of our volunteers, so as soon as he came in, I nabbed him and said, "Let him tell him."
Oh,
He-
okay. Thank you, guys. Thank you very much.